In 1990, Dubai's coastline was just a straight line on a map. Today, it's home to the world's largest artificial archipelago, visible from space. The world's coastlines are changing faster than ever before. And today, we're going to look at how countries are literally making new land appear out of the ocean. From futuristic islands in the Maldives to flood-proof cities in Nigeria, these insane land reclamation projects are changing the map. And trust me, they're bigger than you think. So, what exactly is land reclamation? It's the process of creating new land from oceans, riverbeds, or lakes. People have been doing this for centuries, but modern technology has taken it to a whole new level. We're not just talking about filling in a small pond here and there. We're talking about creating entire islands, extending coastlines by miles, and even building new cities where there was once nothing but open water. China is leading the pack in this game. They've reclaimed over 4,600 square miles of land. That's bigger than the entire country of Jamaica. And they're not slowing down. They've built this absolutely massive machine called a dual-fuel dredger. Think of it as a giant vacuum cleaner for the ocean floor that can fill up 15 Olympic-sized swimming pools with sand every single hour. But China isn't the only player in town. Singapore has increased its land area by 23% through reclamation. Singapore's been at this game since the 1960s, and they've gotten pretty good at it. They've reclaimed land for everything from airports to public housing. Now, let's talk about what these mega projects actually cost, because the numbers are going to make your wallet cry. But here's the thing. Countries aren't just throwing money into the ocean for fun. There's actually some pretty serious math behind all this. Let me break it down. A square kilometer of reclaimed land in Asia is about $100 million to $300 million. Annual revenue from that same land could hit $1 billion or more. Time to break even is often less than 10 years. Not a bad investment, right? Well, if you confront the initial costs. The machines making all this possible are absolutely mind-blowing. Modern dredgers are basically floating factories, and they're getting bigger every year. The largest ones are longer than 3 football fields and can dig deeper than a 10-story building. They're using GPS systems so precise they can place sand within inches of where it needs to go underwater. There's actually a bit of a competition going on right now, and it's getting pretty intense. China's in the lead, but Singapore, Dubai, South Korea aren't far behind. Each new project seems to be trying to outdo the last one. It's like an arms race, but with sand and concrete instead of missiles. Sure, we can build new land now, but what happens 50 or 100 years down the line? Will these artificial islands and reclaimed areas be able to withstand rising sea levels and more frequent storms due to climate change? Let's find out in this video. But first, let's look at some of these insane projects in detail, starting with one that's happening right now in the Maldives. The last one on the list will blow your mind, so stay tuned until the end. We're talking about 11,508 square kilometers of new land, an absolutely bonkers number until you realize the Maldives is running out of space faster than a New York apartment. And it's even wilder when you consider that the Maldives itself is just 300 square kilometers. They're essentially building a whole new mini-city from scratch. The Maldives is one of the lowest-lying countries in the world, with an average ground level of just 1.5 meters above sea level. So when they're building new land, they're not just thinking about making room for more resorts and housing. They're thinking about survival. The Ras Malay project is designed to be 2 meters above sea level, which might not sound like much, but in the Maldives, that extra half meter could make all the difference. They're not just building it high enough for today's sea levels. They're actually planning for the future, building it high enough to deal with rising sea levels for the next century. The project estimated cost is $1 billion, which might sound like a lot until you consider the alternative, having parts of your country slowly disappear underwater. When you put it that way, it's actually a bargain. The project officially started in December 2023, with Sri Lanka's Capital Marine and Civil Construction (CMC) handling the land reclamation. Construction is expected to wrap up by the end of 2026. The government is also planning to reclaim an additional 85 hectares from Gulhi Falhu and 50 hectares from Gira Avaru Falhu, all connected by bridges to help solve the housing crisis in the Malé region. If you've ever seen pictures of Dubai from space, you've probably noticed that giant palm tree shape sticking out into the ocean. That's the Palm Jumeirah, probably the most famous land reclamation project ever built. At 5.72 square kilometers, it's not the biggest project we'll talk about today, but it's definitely the most recognizable. They used enough sand to fill 2.5 Empire State Buildings. Here's a fun fact. They had to bring in sand from the Persian Gulf because local sand wasn't good enough for construction. And if you laid out all the rocks used in the breakwater around it, they'd form a line from Dubai to Abu Dhabi. That's about 140 kilometers. This project has added 78 kilometers of new coastline to Dubai. That's a lot of prime beachfront property. If there's one project that screams, "Because we can," it's the Palm Jumeirah in Dubai. Speaking of Dubai's artificial islands, the Palm Jumeirah isn't actually their only project. Dubai's been steadily expanding its coastline with several other land reclamation projects, each serving different purposes. Dubai Islands, which was originally planned as another palm-shaped project, is now taking a different approach. The new design includes entertainment districts, wellness centers, and multiple resorts spread across the reclaimed land. Next to it, Dubai Harbor is adding 20 million square feet of new space, featuring the Middle East's largest marina and a mix of residential and commercial areas. A bit further down the coast, there's Jumeirah Bay Island, shaped like a seahorse and stretching 2.2 kilometers near the Burj Al Arab. The project splits neatly into two sections, one side hosting entertainment facilities and a new water park, while the other offers 140 luxury apartments and a marina. Dubai Creek Harbor takes a slightly different approach with its 6 million square meter development. The project includes a central park, waterfront developments, and a transport network combining bikes, buses, and trams. Meanwhile, Blue Waters Island, home to the world's largest observation wheel, Ain Dubai, adds another 6 billion dirhams, about $1.6 billion worth of development to the mix with its residential buildings and retail spaces. Last but not least, let's talk about one of Dubai's most ambitious and controversial projects, the World Islands. Launched in May 2003, this project aimed to create 300 man-made islands arranged in the shape of a world map, sitting 4 kilometers off Dubai's coast. The initial construction was impressive. By January 2008, they'd finished the 27-kilometer breakwater that encircles an area 7 times the size of Venice. The project added 931 hectares of new land and 232 kilometers of beachfront to Dubai's coastline. But then came the 2008 financial crisis. Despite the developer Nakheel claiming they'd sold about 70% of the islands at prices between $20 to $50 million each, development ground to a halt. By May 2016, only 2 of the 300 islands were actually being used: Lebanon Island with its beach resort and Sweden Island, where they'd started building luxury villas. Now, after nearly 2 decades, the world is seeing signs of life again. The Heart of Europe project, launched in 2014 by the Kleindienst Group, aiming to complete this section by 2026, with the first hotel, Côte d'Azur Monaco, already welcoming guests since September 2022. Speaking of ambitious projects, let's talk about Hong Kong's Lantau Tomorrow Vision, also known as the Khao Yi Chau Artificial Islands Project. At 171 square kilometers, with a staggering price tag of $80 billion. This project is massive. We're talking about enough space to house 1.1 million people. That's like building a new Dallas in the middle of the ocean. First proposed in 2014 and officially announced in 2018, this massive development aims to create 1,700 hectares of artificial islands off the eastern waters of Lantau Island. This project was pitched as a solution to Hong Kong's housing shortage and a way to create a new economic hub. The plan included artificial islands, a transport network, and even public parks. It was like they were trying to build a mini Hong Kong next to the actual Hong Kong. As of 2024, the project has been postponed, but not cancelled. The development minister, Bernadette Lin Han Ho, recently confirmed that environmental and planning studies will continue this year, despite a delay of up to 3 years in the actual reclamation work. One of the main concerns was the impact on the pink dolphins that live in the waters around Lantau. These dolphins are already endangered, and a massive construction project in their habitat probably wouldn't help matters. It's a classic case of development versus conservation. On one hand, Hong Kong needs more space. On the other hand, do they need it badly enough to potentially wipe out a species? It's not an easy question to answer. Now, if you thought the Palm Tree Project was ambitious, wait until you hear about Indonesia's plan to build a giant seawall. This wall is planned to cover 1,000 square kilometers. To put that into perspective, that's almost twice the size of Chicago. The project is designed to save Jakarta from sinking, which is currently sinking faster than any other big city in the world, with some areas sinking up to 25 centimeters per year. Named after Indonesia's national symbol, a mythical bird important in both Buddhism and Hinduism, the Great Garuda Project includes a 40-kilometer seawall, standing 24 meters tall, 17 artificial islands. The original price tag was set at $40 billion. But let's be real. When was the last time a mega project came in under budget? It's an impressive vision, but it's also incredibly expensive and complex. And some experts worry that it might not address the root cause of Jakarta's problems. After all, if the city keeps sinking, even a giant seawall might not be enough to keep the water out in the long run. Moving over to Lagos, Nigeria, where they're building what they're calling the Manhattan of Africa. And you know what? They might not be exaggerating. Echo Atlantic is a 10 square kilometer project that's basically creating a whole new city from scratch. This new city will include a financial district, residential areas for 250,000 people, office space for 150,000 workers, a power grid independent from Lagos, 8.5 kilometers of beaches. This massive project emerged from a pressing need to solve two major problems: coastal erosion and Lagos's chronic shortage of real estate. Echo Atlantic is being built on land reclaimed from the Atlantic Ocean, and it's designed to be a self-sufficient, sustainable city. The plans include everything from residential areas and office spaces to schools, healthcare facilities, and even its own power generation. One of the project's most remarkable features is its coastal defense system, nicknamed the Great Wall of Lagos, a 8.4 kilometers long seawall to protect Victoria Island from coastal erosion. Back in 1971, the area we now know as Marina Bay was just ocean. That's right, one of Singapore's most iconic districts started as open water. But Singapore had a vision. Over the next few decades, they reclaimed 360 hectares of land, about the size of Central Park in New York City. Fast forward to 2010, and Marina Bay Sands opened its doors. That striking building that looks like a ship resting on 3 towers. It cost a staggering $5.6 billion to build, making it the world's most expensive standalone casino property at the time. But it turned out to be worth every penny. Since opening, Marina Bay has welcomed over 470 million visitors, hosted more than 1,000 750 major events that had never been to Singapore before, and created over 11,500 jobs. Not bad for a place that used to be just ocean, right? And they're not stopping there. Currently, they're planning a $1.75 billion expansion, which includes a new luxury hotel tower with a sky roof, a 15,000-seat arena, and a variety of new restaurants and entertainment spots. Construction is set to begin in July 2025, with completion expected by July 2029. Malaysia looked at all these single island projects and said, "Hold up, why not build 3? The Penang South Islands project is exactly what it sounds like. 3 artificial islands covering about 9 square kilometers. Originally, they planned to build 3 artificial islands, but in May 2023, they decided to scale it down to just 1. This single island, nicknamed Silicon Island, will cover 930 hectares. That's about twice the size of Central Park in New York. And they're not wasting any time. Construction started on Phase 1 in July 2023, which will cost about $850 million. They're planning to finish Phase 1 by June 2030. What makes this project different is its focus on sustainability. They're not just building an island, they're trying to create what they call a smart, green Silicon Valley of the East. The whole development is designed to include eco-friendly practices and smart technologies. Let me introduce you to the biggest land reclamation project on our list. And when I say big, I mean absolutely massive. The Saemangeum project in South Korea makes everything else we've talked about look like sandbox projects. We're talking about 409 square kilometers of reclaimed land. To put that in perspective, it's about 2/3 the size of Seoul. The South Koreans have some practical plans for all this new space. A future mobility cluster for automotive development, a renewable energy complex with floating solar panels, a waterfront city with smart technology, industrial areas, and business districts. The centerpiece of this whole thing is a 33.9-kilometer seawall that's literally record-breaking. It snatched the title of the world's longest man-made sea barrier from the Netherlands' Zuiderzee Works in 2010 and got itself into the Guinness World Records while it was at it. The project started back in 1991, and if you think building something this massive would be straightforward, well, let's just say it wasn't. The project faced more court battles than a celebrity divorce, with environmentalists and the government going head-to-head for years, mainly because this area used to be a popular spot for migratory birds. About 400,000 shorebirds would stop here during their long flights between Asia and Alaska. But the South Korean government is pushing ahead with what they're calling an eco-friendly gradual development, which, if we're being honest, sounds a bit like putting a healthy label on a chocolate cake. So, what's the future of these land reclamation megaprojects? Over the next 50 to 100 years, the potential for rising sea levels and intensified storms could dramatically impact the viability of these artificial islands and reclaimed coastlines. While advanced materials, flood barriers, and robust foundations are being integrated to enhance resilience, they might not be enough if the rate of sea level rise exceeds predictions or if extreme weather becomes more severe and frequent. As sea levels rise due to climate change, we might see more countries turning to these projects as a way to protect their coastlines and expand their territories. Technology will probably play a big role in future projects. We might see more eco-friendly methods of reclamation, or even floating cities that don't require land reclamation at all. Some scientists are even looking into using plastic waste to create artificial islands. Another interesting development is the concept of blue urbanism. This approach looks at how cities can expand into coastal waters in a way that benefits both humans and marine ecosystems. Instead of just filling in the sea, blue urbanism proposes creating structures that can coexist with marine life. Think of buildings with underwater levels that double as artificial reefs, or floating neighborhoods that generate their own energy from waves and tides. We're also likely to see more projects focused on climate adaptation rather than just expansion. As sea levels rise, some coastal cities might use land reclamation as a way to build up their defenses against flooding. Some countries are getting creative with this balance. For instance, the Netherlands, with its long history of fighting against the sea, is now looking at ways to work with nature rather than against it. Their Room for the River program is actually about giving more space to rivers to flood safely, rather than just building higher dikes. It's a complete 180 from their historical approach, and it shows how our thinking about land and water management is evolving. Now, before we get too excited about all this new land, we need to talk about the environmental concerns. These projects can have some serious environmental impacts. They can disrupt marine ecosystems, alter water currents, and even contribute to coastal erosion in other areas. It's not all sunshine. When you're dredging up millions of tons of sand from the ocean floor, you're bound to stir things up a bit. Marine life can be displaced, water quality can be affected, and the whole underwater ecosystem can be thrown out of whack. And let's not forget about the impact on coastal communities. Fishermen might find their traditional fishing grounds destroyed or altered. Beaches in neighboring areas might start eroding as sand patterns change. So, while land reclamation can lead to impressive new developments, it's not without its costs. As we continue to push the boundaries of what's possible, it's essential to balance ambition with responsibility. Protecting our environment and respecting local communities need to be part of the equation if these projects are to succeed in the long run. So, what do you think? Are these ambitious projects the future of urban development, or should we be more cautious about reshaping our coastlines? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.